Okay, so now that we've written the bulk of our research paper, now that we have done, a very basic thesis, which is basically like a statement that the topic that you're researching is a problem in the world. And because you've already done your body paragraphs with your sandwiches, you got your topic sentence, your research, why it's important, your research, why it's important, and then close the sentence, or sorry, the paragraph off with a closing sentence. Now it comes to the point where you need to write an introduction and conclusions. And the reason I suggest writing introductions and conclusions afterward is that it's a lot easier to do a really good introduction and to do the steps of an introduction once you know what the bulk of your paper is about. So I have a document that I'll be sharing that's already posted in Schoology, and I have that pulled up right here. And then I have also written a model introduction and a model conclusion, and I'm going to talk through the elements of each. So with that said, introductions are supposed to get the reader's attention. They're supposed to relate to the topic of the paper directly and make it relevant to the reader. They're supposed to preview the main points that are going to be part of your research or your argument, and then also to set the agenda for the argument itself, in other words, the thesis. So step one is known as an attention-getting device. You have to get the reader's attention at the beginning of an introduction, and some of the bullet points get the reader's attention. The first one says a shocking fact or a statistic, followed by an explanation or an elaboration on that point. Second thing says a quote that is relevant and interesting, followed by an explanation of how or why that quote illustrates the importance of the topic of your paper. The third one says a brief description or narrative that is directly related to the main topic at hand. In other words, you're actually welcome to tell a story of some sort to get people's attention. The fourth thing then is anything that is appropriate or topic related that will get the reader interested in the topic of your paper. So how long should the attention getting device be? I would suggest maybe 2 to 3 sentences, but it can be a little bit longer, maybe 5, but your attention getting device is the very first thing that you should do. The second step then is known as the relating step. In other words, why should anybody read this paper? Why should your reader be interested at all in what you've laid out as far as the research is concerned? So in other words, it's a statement in which you justify why the reader needs to be compelled to read and be informed about the topic that you have written about. So some of the questions should be like, why should they even care? You should spend, 2 to 3 sentences on this part. We'll look at the model here in a second. The third step of an introduction then is known as a preview step. It helps your reader to know what's coming ahead. Now that you've already written your primary argument, you have an idea of what you're going to say. So what you should probably do is outline what the general big points of your paper are going to be about. Now try to do your best to not use first or second person voice, and we'll look at an example of this very shortly. The fourth step of a highly effective introduction then is the thesis itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ship from the how-to document, and I'm actually going to go to a model. So in this model introduction, what we have here then is the emission of greenhouse gases is considered one of the greatest threats to human life. Climate change as a result of greenhouse gases is already creating havoc on biomes and weather worldwide, and it's already begun to affect human behavior, commerce, and the ability to produce food. This right here is the attention-getting device. That is actually step 1 of the introduction, okay? So then the second step after you get the reader's attention was what is known as the relating step. Why does the reader actually have to understand this topic? Why is it relevant for them? So the next line says, understanding greenhouse gases and their role in climate change is extremely important given lifestyle choices, political choices, and social policies which will affect everyone globally. So this right here that I'm using the purple pen around is the actual relating step. In other words, it answers that question about why we're going to be reading this research paper to begin with. The next step then was what is known as a preview step. It says this essay will examine what greenhouse gases are, how they chemically interact with the environment, their impacts on the atmosphere and the environment, and the consequences if humans do not begin to take action on curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this then tells the reader basically the 4 major sections of the paper. ahead of time. It's going to be about chemically what they are, how they interact with the environment, what do they do to the atmosphere and the environment, and what's going to happen if things don't change. So then that brings us to the very last part, which is our thesis. And because our thesis is an informative essay thesis, it doesn't have a huge argument. It basically states that such and such a thing is the problem. So greenhouse gases are having a major impact on the Earth and present serious challenges to the future of life on Earth. There's your thesis. Everything that's in this paper is going to show that firsthand. But just a quick recap. This was step one, the shocking or attention-getting device. Number two, the relating step. Why does the reader need to understand this? 3, which is the preview step. And then number 4 was the thesis itself. So then that brings us to then, when I go back to this, is let's talk about conclusions. So now you go through all the points of your research. You've got all your parenthetical citations. What you need at the end is a clear conclusion that's organized, that makes life easier for the reader to come to a conclusion about the topic that you've just explained to them. So introductions are like the flip of conclusions. Conclusions and introductions are like the opposites of each other. So the first thing that a conclusion should have is the restatement of the thesis. And what you're going to do when you restate that thesis is you're going to basically the order of the previous one. The second thing that you should do is the recap of the main points of your research. So if your preview step showed what was going to happen in the paper, your recap of the main arguments and points is a recap of what you went over. It's the exact same thing, just instead of done third, it's done second here. One of the things that's worthy to study then is like questions or ideas for further research that have to go with this topic. You know, what other things do we need to research? What other things should we explore when we talk about whatever you've been researching? What are some other things that could have been researched? What are some other ideas that need to be explored? Those are suggested there in the conclusion. And then the last part of a conclusion should be what is known as a closing statement or a call to action. In other words, what needs to be done about this topic? And you know, you might want to be reader specific on this, but you can also be very general. But in either case, I have written a model conclusion to kind of go and illustrate what it is that we're talking about. So the first thing is, in the model conclusion, the thesis, the future of life on Earth is dependent on the action steps taken to curb the emission of greenhouse gases. This right here is exactly the same thing as that one right there, except for I've just inverted the word order. Okay? So now that was step 1 of a conclusion, restate the thesis. Step 2 of a conclusion then is to recap the main points of what you research. So look at the composition of greenhouse gases, how those gases interact with the environment, the rising temperatures, and how the ecology of biomes is changing, as well as the necessary to act to curb greenhouse gases, all present challenges to the human race moving forward. Boom, that it restates all of the points and recaps the main points of the research. So then that brings us to step 3, which is what are some things that we need to research further? So looking at this part, even so, more research and more technology are needed in order to combat the deleterious effects of greenhouse gases. So that's another suggestion about researching technology and things. And then the last but not least is what is known then as the call to action. Therefore, as global citizens, it is imperative to support social policies, political candidates, and other entities who are dedicated to improving and helping the issue of greenhouse gases. And that right there is your call to action. So that was step 4. So a quick recap of how to write a conclusion. Start with your thesis restated. Step 2, recap what you discussed in the major topics of your research. Step 3, suggest further questions or ideas for research. And then step 4, a call to action for the reader. And if you follow those step-by-step action steps in your writing, it's going to make your writing that much clearer for your reader. You'll impress all of your teachers if you did both of those things for your introductions and your conclusions. So I hope that this was informative and helpful. Thank you.